of his description of the conversation that the Deputy Attorney General had with Ghislaine Maxwell, saying that essentially he doesn't want people to get hurt by the release of the materials.
Again, he is concerned about himself. We know for a fact that he is in the Epstein files. And personally, I don't think it's a big secret that that's the reason that they wanted to cover up. It's the reason that the House had to flee D.C. as they're talking about the Texas Democrats that are standing for democracy. They decided to flee D.C. trying to avoid the Epstein files and hoping that the base would forget about it when we come back at the beginning of September. What they did not anticipate is that while they may have the numbers, it is the Democrats that always have the brains, and they did not anticipate that this particular oversight subcommittee would actually be able to get the subpoenas necessary. They voted in a bipartisan way, and that was before we actually left. It's just that Comer is just now signing off.
Yeah, and on those subpoenas, does that include, do you know, the transcript or audio recording of Todd Blanche's interview with Ghislaine Maxwell?
It should not, because in my opinion, this was an issue that they voted on prior to the creation of that. Okay. So it's hard for you to say, give me something that doesn't exist at that time. Now, considering the fact that Comer took a little while before he actually issued the subpoena for the files, then that may ultimately end up being included, because by the time he did the issuance of it, he may have said, give me every single thing. But at the time that the motion was voted on, that was something that hadn't even been created.
Do you want that to become public? The transcript?
I think that Congress needs all the files, period, and then we can go from there. Do I trust Todd Blanche? Definitely doesn't trust him on the way that the president trusts him. In fact, he talked about how great he was, but the last time that I checked, he actually lost that case for the president in New York. So there were definitely a group of jurors that did not believe that he was this great, incredible attorney that was to be trusted.
Speaking of attorneys, you were previously a public defender. Yeah. And when it comes to Ghislaine Maxwell's attorney fighting the release of the grand jury materials, do you think that that is the right position, that those grand jury materials should not be released?
I absolutely agree, actually. As a former criminal defense attorney, and ultimately as someone who really does believe in foundational things around our democracy as well as our criminal justice system, the secrecy of the grand jury process is something that is pivotal to our criminal justice system. And while everything is falling apart around us, I absolutely believe that the judges are making the right decision. This is something that's gone up in front of a judge before, and the judge said no, because that is the law. And I do think that there is a greater risk to a lot of people, not just the victims, but those that participated in the grand jury, if those files are to be released.
And we've heard from these victims, these survivors, some of them have been writing letters to the courts condemning the Justice Department's request to unseal this testimony, which you said that you agree it shouldn't be unsealed. One of them wrote in part, "I'm not some pawn in your political warfare. What you've done and continue to do is eating at me every day after day as you help to perpetuate this story indefinitely." But would a full public congressional hearing also have the same outcome and effect on these victims, do you believe?
Not necessarily. It just depends on how we go about it. I mean, again, the grand jury process is a little different, and it's a lot different in a lot of different ways. And so saying that, no, you don't get the grand jury, but saying, yes, you can have the files, ultimately, think about the cases down in Georgia. We know that special grand jury that they pulled together, ultimately, they made recommendations of, I don't know how many people should be indicted, but ultimately that's not where the state decided to go. So their case files that they actually had for the cases looked a little different than the wide breadth that they had as it relates to the grand jury. So some of these people may have said, hey, listen, I will supply this information for this part of the process, but ultimately they may have decided that they didn't want to go forward on different parts of it, as well as, that when it comes to Trump, people tend to have targets on their backs. And even some of those investigators that were involved, we see how he's treated those over at the DOJ that were involved in investigating him. So some of those people may not have ultimately been involved in the overall case. And I just don't think that it's worth the risk. And I don't think that we should twist the law, even if I am on the side of kind of like full transparency. At the end of the day, I'm a lawyer first. And I want to make sure that we preserve what grand juries are supposed to be, which is secret.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction that you're making there when we're hearing some people in your party argue the opposite. And speaking of your party and control of Congress, obviously we're watching this massive fight play out in Texas. You were actually a state rep the last time we saw Democrats in Texas leave. Yeah. That was over voting rights legislation that was being put into place there that Democrats disagreed with. They left the state to protest what was happening, but ultimately that did get passed and Republicans were able to get that across the line. Don't you believe that's going to be the same outcome in this situation?
Not necessarily, but only time will tell. And first of all, when we go back to what happened in 2021, a lot of people forget how bad that bill was. And ultimately, what passed was a bad bill. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But they were specifically going after souls to the polls. And when we decided to shine a light on that, that actually came out of that. And so we were able to get rid of some of the bad stuff that ultimately would have been in that bill. So we did some good. Now, ultimately, as it relates to this map, we're talking about a tight timeline. Texas has one of the earliest, if not the earliest, primary. I actually have to file for re-election starting in November. So I believe the timeline is that we have to know our lines by maybe October. So the time is ticking, and it's ticking away really fast. That is why you see the Attorney General as well as the governor getting very aggressive, because you can't just change the lines and you can't change the primary without the Democrats being there and providing a quorum. So it kind of depends. And there are two chambers. And over 20 years ago, or approximately 20 years ago, when there was a break in the quorum, it was the Senate. They technically have the numbers right now in the Texas Senate to also break quorum.
So do you believe that ultimately that they will be able to be successful here in delaying this at least further past